Ever ponder what may occur if a well-known collector were discovered to be hiding something that ought to have been considered a national treasure? Would they be hunted down or convicted? What if the man had passed away already? Prepare to learn what happened to Frank Fritz after he passed away, particularly after they discovered something that shouldn't have been in his garage. Fritz Frank. The pursuit of excitement was the foundation of Frank Fritz's career. As co-host of American Pickers, a History Channel program that debuted in 2010 and swiftly gained widespread popularity, he became well known. Frank accompanied Mike Wolfe on his journey around the United States, uncovering antiques and antiquities in abandoned buildings, garages, and barns. Mike was more interested in signs and motorcycles. Conversely, Frank specialized on classic autos, oil cans, vintage toys, and memorabilia from petrol stations. He was a fan favorite because of his extensive knowledge and genuine enthusiasm for the past. Once he was secure, he started purchasing and selling antiques before starting his own company in Iowa named Frank Fritz Finds. He gained notoriety as a picker but also as a preservationist throughout the years. He was perceived as someone who found value in the things that other people threw away. However, he abruptly left the show after so many years of employment, and it was said that his health problems in 2020 were the cause. Was that true though? And do you wonder what transpired during the years that he was out of the public eye? When the cameras stop rolling, have you ever wondered what happens to people? Particularly someone who worked as a detective of the buried history like Frank Fritz. At one point he was among the most recognizable people on American television. Then, however, he abruptly disappeared. No announcements, no interviews, not even a dignified farewell. The sole response to the questions raised by fans was that he was ill. They then opened his garage years after his passing. All of a sudden it didn't seem like a coincidence. After Frank Fritz left American Pickers in 2020, his narrative continued. Actually, the true mystery started at that point. According to official reports, he stepped aside because of back surgery. However, sources questioned whether there was another factor at play. They said Frank wasn't simply sick. He was slowly, carefully, and perhaps purposefully withdrawing from the world. Mike Wolfe, his former co-host, kept growing the brand. However, Frank dropped out of the spotlight entirely. Even his longtime fans were clueless about his whereabouts and activities. It was eventually revealed that Frank had had a crippling stroke around the middle of 2022. In his house he was discovered unconscious. Even so, it wasn't the whole tale. People went nuts because the court promptly appointed a conservator to manage his affairs following his stroke. This legal action is usually saved for those who are not only sick but also unable to take care of themselves. Right away, his possessions, including his house and the now famous garage, were strictly protected. Why he is under such strict legal lockdown was the question. Others noted that no family member had stepped in, while others claimed it was typical procedure. Nobody was aware of the contents of the garage. The garage door hadn't opened in a long time, according to those who had visited Frank in his latter years, not even close friends. What did he conceal, and why? In Lair, Iowa, where he formerly threw wide his arms to vintage enthusiasts, locals said that Frank completely ceased interacting with people. His land was now exclusive and fenced. At strange hours of the night, a neighbor reported hearing high engine revs. According to another, they witnessed a delivery truck pull up without license plates and unload a covered car directly into Frank's garage. Then there were the tales and speculations that Frank had purchased an automobile at a Michigan covert estate sale close to one of GM's former prototype storage facilities. There were no records of the sale, no witnesses other than a few guests who indicated that Frank left that day with something concealed under a tarp and an expression on his face that suggested he had discovered more than a collectible. We'll return to this and find out everything, so don't worry. Frank never spoke in public again after his stroke. He didn't post anything on the internet or even issue a statement explaining why he wasn't on the show that made him famous. Everyone was left wondering. For example, why was his assets so promptly placed in the care of a court-appointed handler? What did they hope to hide or keep from being discovered? Perhaps most importantly, what did Frank mean when a handwritten note discovered in the garage was reported to have? It just said, "I left everything there." Was it a warning, a confession, or a farewell letter? Later in the video, everything will become clear. It became evident that this was more than just the collection of an ardent antique hunter as the garage door eventually slid open and light finally struck those abandoned machinery for the first time in years. This was a very different matter. No one was aware that there were cars inside, specifically one that would later spark a flurry of criticism. You must first comprehend one thing about Frank Fritz before we can discuss the car without a VIN. The brass tag that stated it was solely for experimental use, and the vehicle that even specialists were unable to describe. He was not a casual collector. He had a reason for gathering, and that goal might have been to protect something that the world didn't deserve or wasn't supposed to see. Frank Fritz was not merely collecting to adorn his property, you must understand. The stories he was pursuing had been forgotten, and the mystery gets more complicated from there, because the verified facts of what Frank actually possessed raise more questions than they do answers, even when you take away the online rumors. Let's now discuss some of the machines that were located in Frank's covert garage. Consider the 1956 Chevrolet Bear, which is already a legendary vehicle. Not only did Frank own one, he meticulously refurbished it. That vehicle was a time capsule as well as a trophy. The 1967 Ford Fairlane GT 390 is the next vehicle in line. He paid more than $4,000 to restore this gem, which he purchased for about $7,000. It was a beast that deserved to be heard again, according to Frank. Would you want to view another piece? He allegedly purchased the Cadillac Fleetwood with Mike Wolfe. That car was hefty chrome, designed to glide like a ghost, and it was luxury on wheels. It was all vanilla. Let's review the contentious items he possessed. In his collection, Frank owned two extremely rare 1954 Nash Healey sports vehicles that combined Italian style, American power, and British chassis. All told, he spent $46,000 on those. The worst part is still to come. There was no public record of one of those cars ever being registered or seen in his name. How can a car like that be hidden? And did he own any more secret cars? This question will blow your mind at the end of the video, so keep it in mind. Additionally, Frank was among the few private owners of a 1914 Mertz cycle automobile in Iowa. The vintage three-wheeled vehicle has the appearance of something from a steampunk film. It was worth more than $35,000. Cars like these are hunted down, not merely picked, as you are aware. Assume that Frank was a top hunter with the reputation, resources, and intuition to locate them before anyone else was aware that they were for sale. The complete list was unknown even to his closest pals. As one old friend put it, Frank never bragged, but I always got the feeling he had something stashed away that he didn't want the cameras to see. After all, you're famous for sharing your passion with the world, so why would you hide part of your collection? His stroke in 2022 raised even more questions about his secrecy. The conservatorship, the hospital stays, and the court case over his treatment garnered media attention. However, there were references to personal property with an unknown value that was kept in several different places hidden inside the court documents. This led to a court-supervised inventory with a particular emphasis on his garage. This was not merely customary procedure. It was a warning sign. Such a thorough forensic inventory would not be necessary if Frank's possessions were so thoroughly documented. But there was something about that garage that needed further care. In order to guard against theft or tampering, the court even put a temporary seal on his property. For a few vintage cars and gas station signage, why would the court go to such lengths? According to others who knew him, Frank's collecting preferences changed in his later years. Sharing finds or selling them for a profit no longer interested him. Rather, he grew more protective and secluded. According to reports, he had declined multiple invitations from motor shows and institutions to exhibit pieces of his collection. In addition, nobody has been inside the garage for years, not even Mike Wolfe, his co-host. Prior to Frank's stroke, Mike acknowledged in interviews that the two had lost touch and had not spoken for a while. The same was said by friends. Frank had entirely disappeared. Curiosity must be killing you all. And it makes perfect sense. Why didn't we ever see Frank's own collection if he was such an avid antique hunter? The solution is straightforward. No TV ever showed Frank's garage. Fans were aware of his collection, which included vintage automobiles, motorbikes, and signs. However, nobody was aware of how deep it went. It wasn't a coincidence. Frank deliberately avoided showing off his belongings the way people in his field frequently did. Frank subtly destroyed the spotlight as his former co-host Mike Wolfe began opening stores and creating a public empire. Some referred to it as the show's fallout. Some claimed it was because of his deteriorating health. But what if the true reason was that he couldn't risk it going public because he uncovered something so valuable? Maybe he was unable to discuss things. In Iowa, there was something concealed under a tarp behind a locked garage door waiting to be found at the perfect time. Only after his passing did the mystery start to come to light. Since Frank had no spouse or children when he passed away, court-appointed representatives were in charge of managing his inheritance legally. This implied that whatever he left behind would be thoroughly inspected. Officials expected to find some rare cars and possibly some priceless antiques when they arrived at the property. But nothing prepared them for what they found instead. Years of neglect had encased the garage under layers of time and grime. The door seemed rigid, as if it had not been opened in more than 10 years. Additionally, the vintage car community was devastated by what they discovered when it eventually rolled up. When they rolled down the garage door, it all began. The renowned 1956 Chevrolet Bear, the 1967 Ford Fairlane GT that he had rebuilt, and even the Cadillac Fleetwood that he had purchased with Mike Wolfe years prior were among the vehicles they anticipated. People were aware of these vehicles. Some had even been mentioned in previous interviews or made fleeting appearances on social media. However, there was one car that nobody recognized, according to several sources. Not relatives, friends, or even die-hard enthusiasts who had spent years following Frank's collection. It was obvious that this car was not supposed to be viewed because it was parked awkwardly across the back wall and covered in a discolored gray tarp. It had an odd form. It was elegant, but its proportions didn't fit any known production model, and it was too low to the ground. According to the story, there was complete stillness in the room once the expert drew back the tarp. It had a Corvette-like appearance, yet it was unlike any Corvette anyone had ever seen. The lines were excessively angular. The curves were very harsh. The body had the feel of an unfinished concept automobile that was never intended for use on public roads. The most peculiar aspect was the absence of a VIN or identification number in the usual places. Rather, a little brass tag that said only experimental use was there. That's when the rumors began. Could this be a prototype that somehow escaped the annals of automotive history, or was it a custom work or a master replica? Some said it was similar to the venerable Corvette Grand Sport, a racing vehicle that GM had covertly developed in the 1960s before being discontinued because of corporate racing prohibitions. Officially, only 5 were produced. All 5 belonged to prestigious collectors or are accounted for and secured behind museum glass. What was this then? Online theories started to circulate. There were many who thought Frank had obtained the car through a covert arrangement with a former GM engineer. Others said that in order to avoid leaving a paper trail, he had bought cash for the car at a little-known estate sale in Michigan. But why conceal it? Why not bring it up? Why would Frank hide this car at the back of his garage, hidden from the public after decades of showcasing his life and collection on national television? There was still another mystery after that. Which note was it? If we go deeper, the tales and stories on the internet said that there was a tape on the back wall directly above his former workbench. A piece of yellow paper with Frank's calligraphy scrolled across it. All it said was, "I left everything there." There was just that. No specifics, no explanation. Some people brushed it off as a rumor. Others referred to it as a farewell to the collection he cherished. Others, however, started to inquire, was this story accurate? Or perhaps it was a message, a breadcrumb that someone would eventually follow. What does it mean to find something that shouldn't have been there? And more significantly, what does it mean that the man who found it decided never to tell anyone? Was Frank concealing a lie, or was he protecting a secret? Could this car really be a piece of automotive history that had gone missing, or was it the most elaborate hoax built by internet rumors? Rumors were already spreading like wildfire now that the garage had only been open for a short while. Almost immediately, word spread that a car had been discovered in Frank Fritz's private collection. It was unregistered, didn't match any known model, and had a tag that read experimental use only. There were no photos, but that only stoked people's curiosity, and in this era of artificial intelligence, people began creating their own versions and sharing them online, claiming that these were the actual images of the car. As the initial shock subsided, the investigation began. Even if the real picture is out there, it will be difficult to tell the difference between reality and truth, but don't worry, because we will give you the final call in this video and tell you the truth. What was it? Was it real? And why had Frank, who was known for sharing even the smallest finds with fans on American Pickers, never mentioned it? When they began examining the frame, the materials and the welds, everything pointed to something much more unsettling. The estate handlers brought in forensic automotive experts and classic car appraisers to assess the discovery. Most people assumed it would be a high-end replica, perhaps a tribute car or a clever mashup of vintage GM designs. The body was reportedly unmistakably Corvette-esque, with styling that was strikingly similar to the iconic 1963 Grand Sport, but the proportions were off. The front had an unusually deep scoop, the rear fenders flared too wide, and this wasn't backyard craftsmanship, this was factory-level work, but not from any known factory. This was where the controversy began. In the early 1960s, Zohar Arkus Dunto, the godfather of the Corvette, had quietly started the Grand Sport program, an attempt to create a lightweight, race-dominant version of the Corvette that could compete with the Shelby Cobra. Although the roofline didn't exactly match anything in GM's records, its experimental design was unmistakably familiar to those who had studied the history of Chevrolet's racing division in the 1960s. GM has always denied the rumors that a few more prototypes were made in secret, some for testing, some smuggled out by rogue engineers, and at least one that allegedly vanished during a cross-country shipment. The project was reportedly shut down almost as quickly as it started, allegedly after only 5 cars were built. Although the company publicly maintains that there are only 5 Grand Sports, insiders have been telling a different story for years. One of Frank's friends claims that he once mentioned going to a private estate auction in Flint, Michigan, the original location of General Motors, which he learned about from an old motorcycle contact. "It's older than it looks," Frank allegedly said when asked about the large object he brought back from that trip, something he didn't even want to show his closest pals. Frank was notoriously private, so at the time nobody gave it much thought. "I'm still figuring it out." Those ambiguous remarks, however, now seem significant in the context of what was discovered. Then another secret was made public online. An old Polaroid that was found in a drawer in the garage workbench showed Frank standing beside the mystery car years earlier, holding what appeared to be a folded technical diagram or blueprint. Naturally, Corvette forums, auto historians, and conspiracy theorists were enraged when it was revealed that the car in the picture was only partially restored and that its bodywork was incomplete. Some claimed the car was a highly advanced replica constructed by a private coach builder using old GM molds, while others insisted it had to be one of the long-rumored test mules prototypes that GM denied ever existed. However, there was one thing no one could explain: why would he hide it? How would it help him after his death? It wasn't like he had any friends or lovers he left behind. Some doubters said the whole thing was a hoax played by Frank himself as one last mystery to stir the pot after his death. According to one theory, Frank might have signed a non-disclosure agreement when he purchased the car, or the seller might not want it tracked down, or Frank might have been afraid of the legal repercussions if it was found to be GM. After all, if the car was never officially released, he wasn't supposed to have it. Now let's get right to the point and find out the truth. Following his stroke, Fritz did have a remarkable collection of vintage vehicles and antiques that were valued and documented by the courts. The Bear, the Fairlane GT, and even the Cadillac Fleetwood were all real, verified and confirmed, and the Nash Halali is also real, rare, costly, and completely unknown. The Polaroid, the note on the garage wall, the secret auction in Michigan, the mysterious Corvette without a VIN, the brass tag that reads experimental use only, and no official documentation or museum have confirmed that such a car ever belonged to Frank. That's where the facts start to get hazy. After extensive inquiry, it was determined that although these allegations,